Welcome to Cleave and Merick Take Over the World. In this episode, we interview comic book creator Wang and the founder of XL Comics. Enjoy this informative show. Well, we haven't even started talking about XL Comics, so we gotta transition because you're a wealth of knowledge. Just a very interesting background you have. That's just, to me, is like really awesome to pick your
Okay.
brain in the history of comics and everything else.
Mm.
But so Excel Comics, there's a
Yeah.
lot of really awesome comics in the series, but you have one that really stands out, Captain China.
Everything China,
And
yes.
I was reading some of Mech Support because of just it's very comical. It's kind of
Yeah.
I like it was I like futuristic stuff like that too. It was kind of funny.
Mm.
But tell me about okay, if you don't mind, just give us a real short
Okay.
synopsis of Excel Comics, and then we could talk about more of some of these different series that you have going.
Okay. All right. Well, it's fairly simple and straightforward. Excel Comic Books is my own independent brand. I started because I just go back to my original goal in high school, which was I'm going to go to Japan and create my own comic books. It got to a point that it's time to create my own comic books. Like I mentioned, I worked for all major comic book companies: Marvel, DC, Archie, the three big ones back then. Providing a lot of coloring materials, what I did for them. And then when I was with Japanese man company, Viz, Tokyo Pop, Yen Press, I provided lettering material for them too. Both industry went through a decline. Marvel and DC did in the 90s, late 90s, and then around 2008, that manga industry, like collapsed too because the whole financial crisis during that time period. And what really happened was you have book chains like Walden Books and Barnes and Nobles and Borders closing down. So their direct, so a distribution number just got plummeted overnight. What's even interesting is I know somebody who still worked there. He was telling me, he goes, "Oh yeah, the Viz was always in the red until 2020 because of COVID. Then their numbers finally actually went in the black for the first time. So it just tells you what a disaster that both of these industry has went into. Mm-hmm. After those two collapsed, it just got to a point that says, I got into comic books not to always work for somebody. No, I don't. Nobody gets into comic books just want to do coloring. Like, nobody get into comic because they want to write their own story, create their own characters. I said, I've been with this industry long enough. And it got to a point. Got to a point that says either I do this now or I'm never gonna do it.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, let me just go do it. So then the funny thing is, out of all the books I started, first wasn't Captain China. It was actually the Luther Chronicles, a Christian comic book, because I was always saying, okay, can we reach a crowd that that doesn't really read comic books? I'm always interested. How can I branch out and sell something to people who didn't? So I was talking to my pastor at the time, and he said, and we really went through a few ideas. Okay, we want to do a Christian comic book. What would it be? And we looked at it. Do we want to just adopt the Bible? But the adopted Bible is so big,
right?
You can work down for 10 years and never finish. And then also, I didn't want to have our interpretation of the Bible because you're supposed to read and get something out of it yourself. So that was a no. Then we looked at, do we do Christian superheroes? But I go, every time they put out a Christian superhero, it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
And it's not. And I go, and sometimes people don't even realize most of the mainstream superheroes are already Christian based. Because I say, hey, ever see Batman, whether the cartoon or the movie? He goes to his parents' grave. There's a cross.
Yeah.
I go, do you remember watching the first Spider-Man when Aunt May was praying before she go to sleep? And then before the Green Goblin popped in, she was praying. So I said, these are always Christian-based comic book characters. I said, if we create one, we're never gonna beat out Spider-Man or Batman or whatever. So I said, let's not do superheroes. Then I said, let's base it on real historical Christian figures. The stories are easily they're real stories that happened. We can just dramatize some of them, and it'll be a little bit more relatable to people. And then package correct Christian messages in there, and try to make it relatable to people. So that's why we started doing that. Now, what's real funny was the first Luther when I finished the first book. It was done. But the artist at this time says, "Oh, I got some other job. I got to go." So after that, it was planned to be six issue series. He did the first one. He had to leave.
Oh man.
So the book just sat there after that for a few years. We couldn't do anything with it. I tried to get other artists, but it's difficult with the industry. So the first book produced was actually a Christian comic book. We did one issue, which I thought was pretty good. Overall it's just a good start. But before we could really get into the meat of it, it just stopped. And I didn't know what to do with that after. I'm like, okay, we couldn't get it back on track. I don't know what happened. And then what really happened was I took a trip to China. I ended up out there. And it was the first time we went, because my mom's like, "Oh, I'm going to visit some relatives in we want to go to Beijing." After we saw the Chinese Olympics at the time, the Chinese Summer Olympics, I think 2008, we're like, "Wow, look, it's great. This looks great." Because China was really opening its door, wanting people to come in and visit them and do tourism, all that kind of tourism investment, and all sorts of business. So, my mom was like, "Well, we got some distant relatives there we haven't seen in a long time. Let's go there." So we went over there, I remember the first night we got there, they picked us up from the airport, we went to a local restaurant, we sat down and started eating. And this is really interesting. We were at the big dining table, they have, they order food, but then they go, "Oh yeah, bring us some wine." So I saw the waitress bring a bottle of wine, and I saw my relative. He pulled it over, really examined the wine label and everything. He goes, "Okay, this is good." And okay, open it. And then he had to explain to us. He goes, "We have to make sure this is not a fake."
Oh yeah.
I was like, "Huh?" He goes, "Before China opened its doors for trade policy, you didn't have problems like this. Right after we opened our doors, this is all sorts of fake stuff popping up, and we have to deal with this."
It's crazy.
Nonsense.
Just a side note: there is this episode. There's this series. I think it's on Netflix or somewhere. I don't remember. But about this guy in America who was counterfeiting wine, like rare wine, and he was just pouring like 2022 wine in a bottle, and he had the printing presses and aged bottles to be like $5,000-$10,000 bottles of wine. He had a whole scam in California, and he had all these people that he kept coming up with these rare vintages that nobody could find until he finally got busted. But so like he made millions of dollars doing that.
But I'll tell you, so that was interesting because my first exposure kind of you kind of go, huh? We always hear like sort of maybe propaganda messages about these communist country, but you really saw the people there, they're really like the sort of worst victim of this. Even when they're opening the doors, allowing capitalism to come in, they're actually more troubled by this.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. So after that trip, I started thinking, that's that's an interesting thing I never thought about, because we think communism is all uptight and they have government control and everything. Sure, the people are under sort of a dictatorship ruling and all that kind of stuff, but then you don't see this other side of we're still sure that we open up this door at least for capitalism. We have money now. There are at least fancy restaurants and we can order wine, but my God, they're the kind of trouble we have to go through now because of that. So I started thinking, that would be interesting, do it, and really I had the idea, like, maybe we can do this. Is an interesting sort of a starting point to write something about that as a comic book.
Yeah.
Of course, very quickly, I think the idea for Captain China was conceived.
Yeah.
But I conceived that as more of a comedy at the time.
Yeah.
Kind of like a parody of American comic books. Like you hear, Truth, Justice, the American Way. I thought, what would it be like if I presented as Truth, Justice, the communist way?
Yeah.
Sort of a flip on that idea. So maybe you have this, and very, very initially it was going to be a more comedy comic book where you have this guy named, I'm Captain China. He's going around telling the American people what they're doing wrong. And it would be kind of an interesting, sort of a much smaller idea for doing that as an approach, almost like a Tick type of comic book.
But let me ask
You
you a
know,
question. What is the market in China for comics? Did you go there and see Chinese comics being
well,
done?
here's what
Was it like manga or?
when I was there, actually, they didn't have a market at all.
Mhm.
You know, because everything was just starting. So they do have some, I guess, Japanese pirated, manga coming in, that kind of stuff. But it's even hard to find because all printed material is heavily restricted and controlled. So it's not as
Mm.
easy as people think. But I had an idea, but really, it was really going to be done for. I was going to do Captain China just purely for American audience at the time, as a parody, like the Tick, doing a spin on just that idea of of a Chinese superhero calling it how the Americans, you're doing things wrong. This is how you really do it. That kind of stuff.
I love the
And I
idea. Even if you
right,
change it to more serious, it's just such a novel concept.
right, right.
Yeah.
And the
Hmm.
thing is, everybody I told that idea to go, this is great. That'd be a real fun book to do. Even a friend at one point he goes, why do you do an issue where you have Captain China tied up and it says "sold to America"? He goes, oh, that's been better. So we had all these crazy ideas. We just loosely talked about it. But then I think about another year or two, we went back again. It was during they had the World Fair in Shanghai. So I already had Captain China kind of in the back of my mind, say, okay, maybe I'll do something like that. And then we went back again. I went with my mother again to Shanghai because she wanted to go see the World Fair. I was like, oh, let's go check it out. And this is interesting. At one point during one day, we were kind of split up. She wanted to do shopping, and I just started walking around the streets of Shanghai. And Shanghai is very interesting because during that time, they were putting up these huge skyscrapers, and you see constructions everywhere. And then, but then in the little alley, you still see these very old style Chinese, homes are still there. Like there'll be a whole little like neighborhood be nothing but old fashioned, houses in there too. So it's really a weird mixture of brand new architecture, like Western architecture, almost crazy looking Western architecture versus like very old Chinese traditional stuff.
Mm.
And then in those little alley, I saw vendors selling pirated DVDs. And all the ones he was hanging out there to put out people to drag people over were American superhero films. Batman, The Dark Knight at the time, Spider-Man, X-Men First Class, all that kind of stuff. And I don't remember whether Iron Man 1 came out or not yet, but it was just that. All the stuff he was hanging out, and people were wanting to buy the pirate DVDs. And I saw that, I go, this is interesting. They want this stuff. They want American superhero, properties. Even though the movies has been shown in the theaters, but these pirated vendors are selling in the street because people want them. There's that kind of neat consumption. And that's when and on the trip back, I said, Captain China is just doing it as a parody is a wasted idea.
Yeah.
Because they want this stuff. So
Yeah.
let's see if I can turn it into a real superhero book, which is a really interesting thought to go from let's just be a comedy parody to sounding now this is going to be real. And a lot of it is supposed to, because my thought is they always see some white guy putting on a mask and fight, crime and defeat bad guys. Why don't we give him something now as a Chinese guy who's doing all this? But let's treat it as a real property. Let's not make it a comedy anymore. It'll have comedic elements, but it's going to be a real superhero book,
So
and it's going to be
in the book is Captain China like sanctioned by the Chinese government, or is he like helping the Communist Party, but he's independent, like nobody knows who he is? Or you don't want to give away too much of the plot?
No, I can tell you all of that. So I went back to America and I started saying, okay, if they allow a superhero to happen in China, what would it be?
Yeah.
And so I started looking at all the catalog of your superhero archetypes. Would a Superman type work? And I kind of go, they're a country that really just came out of poverty within the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. For them, a lot of people don't even have cars yet. So to them make them want to believe a guy can fly through the sky is a bit of a barrier.
Yeah.
To see one of the old people do it. So that's not a good idea. I go, someone like Batman who's a vigilante, even Spider-Man, they're kind of like vigilantes. Would it happen? He goes, no, the Chinese government would never allow the vigilante run around their neighborhood beating up crime like that. Yeah. Even though he's doing good, it's not sanctioned by the government. So really, after you look through all this stuff, the only archetype that kind of would work if it's a government-sanctioned superhero, which is Captain America type.
Yeah.
And I go, that kind of fits with Captain China too.
Yeah.
So I say, let's do that. and but I still want to get some of my parody ideas in there. So I said, why don't we just do the same thing? He's a man out of time, you know. So the background setting was that he was actually created during the late 50s, during the Chinese Great Leap Forward movement, when Mao Zedong was in charge. They want to quickly, rapidly advance China into the modern time period. But it failed. The overall Great Leap Forward failed. So let's say he was a failed experiment. But now China is finally, wealthy and strong and powerful enough again. They're bringing him back.
Yeah.
But you have a guy who was really born during that hardcore communist era.
Yeah.
Now he's waking up in sort of this semi
Yeah.
capitalist society. And I thought about it, I go, that seems like it's an angle that's never been done, even in American superhero comic book before.
And it sounds kind of funny at the same time, but it sounds like something you could believe. Like if the Captain America was frozen in time, he comes back and he's, this is not the America that I woke up, and this is not the China that he was born in. So it's like, it just sounds very interesting.
Right. So what would it be like from a hardcore communist soldier to wake up in modern China?
Yeah.
And I go, that's a pretty good idea. It works as a parody to Captain America, but at the same time, it really very quickly branches out to tell its own stories and themes. Mm-hmm. And so the basic idea is what happened when you take almost American superhero type and put it into this communist, socialist, and capitalist-driven society. How would he operate? And I go, boy, that's when I go, I got something I think is very unique and never really been done with superhero comic books before. Let me give that a try.
So I noticed on your Facebook page and reading some of Captain China. So you have an English version of Captain China, and you also have a Chinese version in Cantonese or Mandarin, or
yeah. It was written in tandem. When I would write the English script, I was always writing English first, and then I translate in Chinese, and they kind of do a little fixing in dialogues and that kind of stuff. But the scenario is kind of the same. So I did that, and I'll tell you what's funny is I found that I need to start simplifying my dialogues very quickly.
Is it different for Chinese or for English?
Well, sometimes even just for cultural references. Yeah. So you have to really simplify to a point where sometimes what he says, both culture can get. So it's interesting too. It was also a challenge to say, how can I write for two audiences at the same time?
Yeah.
Can get the same idea and concept across. And all that kind of stuff. And so it had its challenges, but at the same time, I thought it was real fun. I was like, this is kind of great.
Captain China is visually stimulating. I'm looking at the covers you have. You have it's you could tell this is very professional. It doesn't look like a second-rate indie any kind. I would never say that word about you, but it looks like it is very stunning. The covers some of them remind me of different things because you have the military situation. It kind of reminds me of G.I. Joe, just slightly, a little bit. Yeah, some of the covers, but no, it looks really stunning. So it makes me want to read the story now.
Well, I'll tell you, you read it, you'll really be surprised what it talks about. Because there are, like I said, parody elements and comedic elements there, but it really tells a much more believable story. And I really look at it as I think it's the first time somebody really made an effort to not just try to tell just a superhero comic book, but a real story about China itself. Because I look at it and go, I felt like a lot of the stuff that people understand about Chinese culture is there's a filter that you see. Like you think about Chinese culture, you think about China. First thing people always think about is martial arts, kung fu films. But here's the truth: most people in China don't know kung fu or anything. We're not martial artists. But that's kind of a weird perception we have. But that's also built into the book, why Captain China he doesn't know any martial arts. Yeah. And that was one thing I made sure he didn't have. And it was funny because when you asked me earlier, what was some of the Chinese people's reaction? They were actually very shocked that he didn't know how to fight with martial arts.
He wasn't a parody of Bruce Lee, I guess.
Right. But that was purposely done so he didn't know martial arts. Because I didn't want to fall into those tropes. Like suddenly this guy is so good, he has, not only can he handle weapons, he can now, beat people up, with his bare fists and everything. I actually want him to be an underdog. And I want him to go against the sort of the stereotype of what a Chinese hero is. Although what's interesting is his outfit was based a little bit on the Bruce Lee's Kato design.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was looking at. I was thinking that.
Yeah, I based it on that mainly because for the longest time I was trying to find a Chinese superhero image. I was like, what makes people think this is a Chinese superhero? And I really didn't know, to be honest. Like, what should a Chinese superhero look like? But there was two things that occurred. One, when I was with my mother during that time in the first time we were there in Beijing, we were walking around Tiananmen Square area, and there was a young soldier that just, a good-looking guy standing there. My mom was like, "Can I take a photo with you?" So I took a photo of him with my mom. He had this, military hat and everything. My mom was like, "Wow, what a good-looking guy." So I just remember, I said, "Yeah, it's very interesting." My mom would get a picture with the soldier. And then when I started working on Captain China, I really thought, what is the Chinese superhero image? I was stuck on that for a longest time until I saw this sequel to Fist of Legend. I think starting Donnie Yang, where he was he was a martial artist that has to go into hiding, but in order to still do good, he put on the Kato costume. Now, this was interesting. When I saw that movie, I go, okay, Bruce Lee has done the Kato costume. So was Jet Li, because Jet Li actually did Black Mask, which is kind of like a Kato, type of superhero movie for Hong Kong. And now the latest martial artist, Donnie Yen, is also wearing that costume. I go, that is the base image for what a Chinese superhero looks like. But when I look at the Kato costume, that's a sidekick design. That's all black. Now let's see if we can style that into a mainstream superhero look. So that's really where the look come from, was the fact that at least there's a lineage from American superhero, pipeline. But it's now let's make him into main hero look rather than just a sidekick. And that's really the starting point of working on that costume. And because he was Captain China, I said he needs to be, let's see if we can use the flag color like Captain America, which we use as our red, white, and blue for Chinese. Let's do yellow and the red over there. And boy, that was a real challenge too, to how to make sure the way the yellow and red divided. And I kept thinking he can't look like a third-rate superhero. Yeah. Somehow I just said, the final design, when he is done, you can put him next to Captain America. He doesn't look like he's taken down a peg. He has to match him, and they both look like they're first-rate designs. And then you put him next to Batman, you put him with Superman, Spider-Man, he'll look like he belonged there. Was really the goal for that look. And we went through a lot of design. What was interesting was very early on, because I have a lot of these old sketches. One of the early sketches everybody did was he had a shoulder pad. And this is interesting too. But it didn't look right. He had just a little shoulder pad, triangular ones, and I used to go, it didn't look right. And then later on, I really studied American superhero. I said, okay, let me look at all the first-rate superhero. Superman, Batman, Captain America, Spider-Man, every one of those.
Strong shoulders.
None of them has a shoulder pad. You got to see that shoulder line with that goes to the arm. I go, I need to get rid of that. And the minute I got rid of that, the design works. So it's very interesting. When you put a shoulder pad, not put a shoulder pad, actually separates them from a first-rate superhero. That's kind of what I found out. Mm-hmm. It's true. If you look at almost all the classic DC superheroes, they have no shoulder pads. They don't need shoulder pads.
Right.
That's how I came up. That's really what, it's weird. Just removing that and not removing that makes a huge difference in the design look. So that's how I came up with that look. And I think, to be honest, usually when you have the look, it does have to work afterwards.
It's pretty awesome. And you can read Captain China online at excelcomics.com. And I believe you have 12 volumes right now.
Oh, yeah. That's the whole story. The whole story is there.
Yeah. Are you thinking of continuing it, or is it kind of set right now? Or
Well, when I started, I planned a 12-issue arc. Because and this is almost kind of because I lack the understanding how difficult it is to do a real 12-issue run. I just thought, yeah, Marvel used to do, sort of a maxi series of 12-issue arc. We can get this Captain China done within 2 years. But when you're not under that Marvel infrastructure,
Yeah.
doing your own, it's very, very difficult. It took much longer to get it done. But so I planned the first arc, but at least it has a beginning, middle, and an end, a definitive end to what needs to be told within the concept and the theme. And at least that was accomplished 12 issues. I have plans and even a bit of foreshadowing left for things to come. And I could execute those at any time. But I felt like, let me see if I can get the first series sold first. Get into the market, people to buy it. And then let me worry about the rest of that stuff. Because at least it's a complete story. You read it, you follow his journey, and you will really get something out of it. The only thing that I can probably even give away a little bit, because people may not even understand this. I took the traditional, what they call the hero's journey, and I ran it backwards with the story. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Wow. It was run backwards. It was interesting because I let's say, okay, because it kind of goes back to my original thought of, okay, if the communism is supposed to be the opposite of capitalism, or the Americas, about the hero's journey, then let's run that the opposite direction. The hero's journey is a backwards journey. Very interesting.
Wow.
And I thought that makes it very unique too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will be right back with the interview of Chi Wang right after this.
Have you read Brothers of Chaos Part 1, an epic coming-of-age dark fantasy tale by Merick and H. Ulrich? Vandrin of House Glenclair faces insurmountable odds fighting against the corrupt Melborians. He will rely on an unexpected friendship with an elf named Zankadin Umbadin and his alluring sister Zyla. Together they will face the will of the Blood Queen, Empress Ash Exana, and a treacherous plot of a beautiful young blood mage named Lilith. This series is epic fantasy, sword and sorcery, mild dark fantasy with some adult situations. You may find it on Amazon's Kindle Unlimited, audiobooks with Audible, and you can buy the whole series in print. Brothers of Chaos by Merick and H. Ulrich.
And now back to the interview with comic book creator Chi Wang.
So what is Brush Picks? I'm on that site. Is that part of your stuff, or?
Well, Brush Picks. That was one after I had a business partner come in at one point, and he says, "Let's come up with an easier spelling for a website rather than Excel Comics, which is pretty long." So we tinker around with it. We did some search. I said, "Brush Picks sounds pretty good because it sounds like an art kind of site." And that's just easier to tell people to go to directly. But we have Excel Comics, but able to direct to that web address too. And that's why it's Brush Picks is kind of catch free for all, of everything else, and we can put underneath that. We can just direct them. So go to brushpicks.com. We can say it, people can hear it, they know what it is. Like suppose Excel Comics, is it with an S, without an S? You say it's more of a mouthful. So that's why we have that.
When you're at Boomtown, I noticed you had some physical comics of some of these.
Yes.
Do you have the whole? Are you thinking of doing more physical comics, or going to keep mostly ebooks? Or people, if they want to get have you ever thought of doing a graphic novel out of the 12 arc that you could sell? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, here's what it is. I really want to go digital for the longest time. I believe that's where it needs to go. Kids are not really going to comic book shop, and comic book shops are very hard to find.
Oh yeah.
It's not like when we talk about back then. You can go to a drugstore, you can go to a stationery store, or just local. I think they even had some luncheonettes back then. They used to have this stuff. Now it's so hard for kids to encounter a comic book. I feel like you need to be online, but I've been doing that for almost 10 years, and to be honest, the result is very, very, very poor. But every time I show people this stuff on either a phone or iPad, they would be like, "Oh, well, I'd love to buy your book if you can." Print it. I have somebody telling us, okay, then let's just print some and go from there. That's really the thought of it. I mean, Captain China is right now collected 2 volumes. 1 to 6 is one, 7 to 12 is the other one. So I at least started doing that. And right now it's not on the site yet, but we'll make it available. So you can order directly on the website. Within this month or so, because finally the books are ready and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really doing it because people keep saying I'd rather have a hard copy in my hand.
Yeah.
Even though, to be honest, the best viewing experience is when you have an iPad. You open up the website, you can just scroll through that, and it's because originally everything was maximized for that viewing purpose.
So I noticed the other day I was looking at something, and I was looking at a digital comic. I think it was the Savage Sword of Conan, and it is a graphic novel online. And I was looking it through some of the sample pages and stuff because I like Conan the Barbarian, and I know there's so many different Conan the Barbarians. So there's Conan Conan Barbarian. There was Dark Horse Conan, but anyways, I was thinking about that too. Is like anyways, I'm kind of going on a tangent. I'm kind of losing my train of thought. But
Okay,
when I
okay.
saw that, I was thinking about how they sell, ebooks like an ebook. So we're selling most of Cleave and I's what Cleave and I do. I don't want to speak for him, but we sell a lot of ebooks, mostly.
Mm.
And then when we came to Comic-Con, we're like, oh crap, we need some inventory because everything we have is just
Right.
digital. So we had to rush out. We're like, oh my god, are our books going to be in time? Or we're going to show up with an empty table because we didn't have any books and
You had to order them all in.
and
Right.
so I'm starting to think more about print copies too, because I was like, there is a section of people who just don't buy ebooks but they
Right.
at a bookstore or they're somewhere and they see a physical copy. They're like, even when I told my dad I was writing, he was like, oh, okay. But then when he saw one of my books, he's like, oh, you actually are writing, and he looked at it.
Yeah,
This is a
yeah.
real
It's
book.
it's a different feeling when you say, "Hey, I got my copy online," versus when I have the book. I went through that phase, and when you get a book, suddenly they give you a little bit more respect. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's the same word.
Yeah, I mean, if we'd had an iPad or something at Comic Con and people were walking by and I was saying, "Here, you can do it. You can buy it from here," I don't think anybody would have bought it.
Yeah, yeah. It's
But
just
I was selling books like crazy.
right.
physical
I agree.
books.
It's a very strange mentality right now. Everything, even though they will buy games, they will buy music online, but they are not
Yeah.
buying comic
Yeah.
books.
And children's books are actually sold a lot. I've heard that's one
Right.
thing that sells online. And my dad, he's a children's book author, and he went to a vanity press and spent like thousands of dollars to have his book printed. And I was like, Dad, you don't have to do that. We can just upload one, and you just order a couple copies at a time. You don't have to go buy 1,000 copies for
Right.
$6,000. And he's like, you think I
Right.
need to buy 2,000? And I was like, well, how are you going to sell them, Dad?
Right.
He's like, well, all my friends will buy them. But anyways, another story.
No, it's true. Believe me, right now, each hard, the hard copy of Captain China is priced at $24.99 per book. And that's just because it's small run, price I can offer. I wish I could bring them down to maybe $9.99 per book.
Yeah.
But then you have to do volumes, and there's no way to make that happen right now. So so that's the difficulties. I want my books to be cheaper, but it's just the way economics works right now. And then not to mention, ever since COVID, everything's been skyrocketing in terms of price. So it's even harder to bring it down. I don't want to go any further. Good God, I mean, I can't imagine. I think buying Captain Giant for $25 is already a huge hurdle for most people. And now if that thing keeps going to like 30, 35, 40, I think that I think the industry is just going to implode if books keeps going up in price.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's true. And I think people, when they think that the authors, especially independent authors, were like offering a book for $18-20, they're like, oh wow. They don't realize that we're only making about maybe $3.
Yeah.
That all the printing and everything from it is pretty expensive.
Yeah.
To make it look like that.
It's one of those things I'm still trying to figure out, because it's doing printing now at this current time period. It's still kind of a figuring out game, and I don't know. I like I said, I wish everything could be digital, because that'd be so much easier. And but I felt like the weird part is comic books itself, and I don't understand why this is the case. Because even in Japanese manga, in Japan, they're having that problem too. People still want a physical copy. I just think it's a weird category of products that has never truly crossed over digitally.
And Japanese people are very, in my opinion, very technologically advanced people. And everything's got to be more tech over there.
Not really. But the thing is, they're. But how do I put it? They still follow our trend. Once our music went all digital, they were forced to do that.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't even know about this. For the longest time, they were actually resistant to Steve Jobs wanted them to sell all their music for the same price and everything. They were the last one to really join in. because they're very, very traditionalist in their thinking. Um, but in terms of just I mean, they're a country that still can sell cash, salary, on a weekly basis. They're still a cash-driven society. They don't really trust in credit cards, all that kind of stuff. So, but then I don't know. I mean, I feel like when I see kids these days, when I talk to kids, they all use their phone and iPad
Tablets,
now.
yeah.
Right, but somehow, but then those kids are not buying the books, so it's a weird, it's a weird situation we're in.
One thing I was thinking that you said you're selling that when you sold those volumes, or you have 1 through 6, and 7 through 12, I think, of Captain China, and your price point would probably be about $24, $24.99, whatever.
Yeah, so it's $50 if you get the whole thing.
But that's really on par with graphic novels. That's actually pretty close to, I would think, because you're getting basically 6 comic books in one
Right.
book. So I mean, it's, to me, that is just, you're an old school comic guy, and it hurts your heart probably to see, like, that's a comic book, it should be 99 cents, but
Right.
it's not.
Right. No, well, because I feel like it should be as cheap as possible. And to be honest, the reason anime and all that stuff, I mean, does really well. Like, if you go to Barnes and Nobles, if you can still find one of these days, you pull a manga off the shelf, it's $9.99. That's 200 pages.
Yeah.
I mean, American comic right now is about $4 to $5 for a 22-page comic book.
Yeah.
We're just pricing ourselves out of the market.
Oh yeah, you're right.
That's one of the, like, both Cap and China are 200-page books each.
Wow.
But I price it $24.99 as a retail price. For $9.99 or even $8.99, here's a Japanese manga for 200 pages, even though they're black and white.
But you gotta get the volume probably on that too.
Yeah, if I get the volume, I can probably bring it down $10. I've told them, you print 5,000 print run. Yes, it's that. So that becomes a struggle, a balance issue. Like, how can I find the right way to make it easy to buy, cheap, affordable, competitive? Because we're competing right now. American industry don't want to recognize this. We are in direct competition with Japanese manga market, and they're bulldozing over us because of the price. They're pricing how much you get out of a book. And to be honest, they're easier to read. They're more fun. They don't stick any weird current political stance on that stuff too, because kids don't want that.
Yeah.
So, like, we are just, American market is just, we're pricing ourselves out. Our ideas are outdated.
Yeah.
And we're not really focused on them as this is what we must beat.
Right.
They still look and go, we're big Marvel and DC. We got movies. They don't. Well, doesn't matter. You're losing out on that market. And I used to describe this as the way I tell people. I said, that's kind of like if you have the iPhone, the company that produces the iPhone is not selling. But iPhone, the movie, is doing gangbuster in business. People are wearing iPhone T-shirts. People playing songs about iPhone, but the iPhone is sitting there not selling. That's the problem with American comics right now.
Yeah. It's
Everything else about it is selling through the roof. A toy of the iPhone is doing gangbuster. Yeah. Kids love it. They play with the fake iPhone, but the real iPhone's not selling. That's American comic book business right now.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
I remember
think about that.
I remember when G.I. Joe got no fun for me when I was watching I grew out of it because it is kind of like an adolescent thing. We were real into G.I. Joe when I was a kid, but I knew when they started becoming like Captain Planet, I was like, this does not interest me anymore. I mean,
the environmental team comes in.
We could have we could have a conversation about that, why we need to protect the environment and do all that stuff. But for kids and entertainment, it's just like, why dump that on me? I don't want to, and so it could be any issue when you get too, it just kills the story.
Well, I'll tell you what's the problem with that is, people think kids needs to be well protected. So we gotta make sure this is a little bit more for them. Just tell the story you want to tell, and kids will consume it. Yeah. Don't worry about. I wouldn't even say dumbing it down. I would just say don't worry about making it too kid friendly.
Yeah,
the kids actually don't want kid friendly stuff. Here's what it is. I can remember when I was a kid, whether it was 5 or 6. I don't want to be a kid. I want to be a grown up. I want to do what my parents do. I want to, I will always pretend I'd be sitting in a cardboard box, pretend I'm driving a car.
Yeah.
And you see little girls, they want to use their mother's makeup. Kids don't want to be kids. Kids want to be grown up. So when you get them of grown up material, they're like, wow, I get to have this.
Yeah.
That's how kids want to be treated. But we keep saying, well, kids, it's got to be a little safer. So instead of using guns, now they're using, safe weapons, that kind of stuff. Like, no.
That's why I think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was successful, because there was the comic book was a bunch. It was a lot. If you go back and I've watched some of the documentaries, it was a lot edgier, and it ended kind of dark too. I think they all got killed, but yeah, except for one guy was left. I think it was like Donatello or it was Raphael or somebody, and everybody else got killed. And so, but then of course you have the cartoons and everything. But.
Right. I'll tell you, I don't believe in killing your main heroes.
Yeah.
I don't believe it. I think that's I think, not that it can't work, but I think for a lot of comic books don't care here, because here, a lot of kids grew up with these guys.
Yeah.
They want to see them succeed, and if all they've done at the end, they just died.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I strongly believe that most books needs to have a happy ending at the end.
I agree. A payoff.
A payoff for the readers. I'll tell you that there's a reason why Spider-Man at one point sold really well was when he actually got married to Mary Jane. Because it was kind of like, boy, this guy finally got a good payoff of all the deeds he did. And then why it angers so many people when they kind of nullify that marriage is that you're taking that. It's not so much from Spider-Man, but from the readers who are able to share that kind of reward away from them.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
We're getting
you don't do that to your readers.
Getting too smart and killing off our characters.
Right. Killing, I think, is necessary in a book. I think, sure, you can make a point about that. You can make it realistic, but you don't really want to follow your hero on such a long journey and then he just dies at the end. Even if some sacrifice for some reason, unless that sacrifice is so good, that it has a real impact. I think.
Yeah, I think that's another reason why Marvel movies are kind of hitting a kind of an ending point, because they killed off Tony Stark, they killed off Iron Man, and I feel like now what they're trying to do is kind of like, well, you had a good run, but now it's kind of like the movies even are getting to where they're just, to me, not a lot to look forward to lately.
Yeah, well, Captain America gone too.
Yeah, Captain America is gone. Hulk is kind of out there somewhere. Well, I think the biggest problem with what they didn't understand, and this is a problem with the comic book industry before too, is that sometimes when you have a closing point, it's actually a jumping off point for a lot of readers.
Right.
Like I'm just done. I feel fulfilled. And then they had two mistakes. One was they did that, and then all the following properties were no good.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If you follow up with something even stronger, then it's okay. But what they followed up with were all super weak.
Yeah.
Like suddenly I felt like, my God, we're going back to the 90s of superheroes now.
Yeah, because they're trying to find something.
Right. And there's a reason why there was the first-rate Marvel characters and the third-rate characters. They all filled with third-rate characters right now. They can't make them work.
Yeah. And Star Wars is kind of doing the same thing. I mean, I don't know. They're just every other like side character has a series.
Yeah.
And
nobody cares about these side characters. That's
I don't.
Go ahead.
I don't want to see the Falcon turn into Captain Marvel. He's the Falcon. I want him to stay the Falcon.
Yeah.
Not Captain Marvel, Captain America. I mean.
Well, here's what it is. I'll tell you. I had a discussion with my business partner about that. Because he's black too. Because he went to see it, I went to see it. And both of us had the same conclusion. This is interesting. He goes, okay, we both like Anthony Mackie. We think he's a great guy. We think the character Falcon is great. And to be honest, I'm not 100% against him becoming Captain America. But we watched it, we're like, there's just something lacking. And what we really came down to was the fact that at the end, that character has no true motivation. Because if you ask me, okay, what was he really about in this movie? Did they really define his character? You know, we come down to the fact he has no defining moment like Steve Rogers in the first Captain America movie.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a moment where, you know, he's getting beat up by a bully in the alley, and he pulls up the trash can lid and says, "I can do this all day." And then the second major moment was when he jumped on the grenade.
Yeah.
Those two are two clear character defining moments that tells you who Steve Rogers is.
Right.
And then Steve Rogers also has a romance interest in the movie. That's kind of like his own very little personal desire that he wants. That's not to do with this bigger, grander character. That's more of a selfish, personal thing. And I go, the new Falcon Captain America didn't have that.
Well, maybe they needed to go back and do like a prequel of why Falcon wanted to be Captain America or something.
Well, not even that. They should have had his family members show up. Who are his family members?
We don't know anything.
We don't know anything about him. So after after so many Avengers movie he appeared in, after that, you know, Falcon and Winter Soldier series, and now even after this, he still has no romantic interest. He has no real supporting cast either. Mm-hmm. He has no personal motivation or even selfish desire.
And that kind of goes back. I think that's what it goes back to. The people in charge who are making these movies are thinking from money standpoint and not from story standpoint. So they say, "Go make this movie, do this," and then there's no defining, character.
Well, I think that's part of it, and here's the other thing that people talk about. He has no villains of his own. They have to pull villains from the Hulk. Most of his, it's like people are like, this is more like a Hulk sequel than a Captain America movie. He didn't even have villains of his own. Mm-hmm. So that was the problem. He has nothing. They're all borrowed components. So you never fleshed out the characters. One of the major things that I did with Captain China was that I said he needs to have his own villains. He needs to have his own supporting cast. He has his own villains. So there's conflict from both fronts. It's a very simple Marvel writing trick. Mm-hmm. I asked people this recently. I said, who do you think, out of all the superheroes, who do you think has the greatest villain Rose Gallery? I'll just ask you guys as sort of a trivia.
Probably Spider-Man. I mean, he's got a lot of villains, but
actually, no.
I think Captain America has the best.
Well, we can't even go to DC. We can't even go to DC.
DC?
Yeah, out of all the superheroes.
Probably Superman, I don't know.
It's Batman.
Batman
has the best Rose Gallery, and there's a very clear reason why. Because every one of those villains he fights is a component of himself that's taken to the extreme. Like Two-Face is the dual identity taken to the extreme.
Yeah.
Penguin is sort of a wealthy aristocrat like him.
Yeah.
Taken to the extreme. Joker is the complete opposite. Mm-hmm. Catwoman is someone like him that's just on the wrong path. So, something like Scarecrow's using fear.
Yeah.
Tactic.
Like the bat.
Right. That's why Batman has the best rogue gallery, because it has all these direct connections to who he is as a component, how they could have easily gone wrong. And when he stops him, he's reminding himself where he could have easily gone down that path. And so it's very interesting, the theme and the moral it can project. The second best Rose Galleries belongs to the X-Men, because it's different ideology to Charles Xavier's dream. Charles Xavier wants coexistence with the humans and mankind. Magneto is about separation. We don't want anything to do with them. You have the Hellfire Club, meaning we just use our powers for good. We don't care about mankind. They're kind of our playthings. And then there's Apocalypse, who is survival of the fittest. Mm-hmm. So because of that ideology, makes his villains interesting and worthy to fight, and their stories get crafted that.
Yeah.
Spider-Man will probably come in third in Rogue's Gallery.
This is so. Go ahead. Go ahead.
But Spider-Man is just mostly. What I find interesting, Spider-Man's villain gallery is good because they're almost all animal based, easily identifiable what their powers are and what they can do.
Yeah.
But in terms of motivation, they're just mostly bank robbers.
Yeah.
There's no psychological malfunction like most Batman villains.
Yeah.
I always thought the Fantastic Four had a really great rogues gallery as well.
They were probably number 4. But Fantastic Four, unless they explain it to you, you don't know what they're about. Yeah, what's Galactus about? If you see the visual, you don't know what he is.
Silver Surfer. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Spider-Man, you see the visual. Okay, it's a rhino. He's got to be big and powerful.
Yeah. So
the Vulture, he can fly.
So
that kind of stuff.
Chi, you're such a wealth of comic book story
Yeah,
knowledge. It's so awesome. So we talked a little bit about Captain China, but I don't.
yeah.
I want to just run. Let's go ahead and touch on some of your other series that you have, and this is definitely going to
Okay.
be a two-parter because this is the longest we've had a guest on it. I don't want
Oh
to end it
man.
yet, but it's
Okay.
great because we usually do.
Yeah, we can do two parts.
Yeah,
It's
I
fine.
like it. I like it.
Okay.
So tell us a little about Scarlet Scar. I would like to know
Okay.
about that storyline because it's completely different than Captain China, and it's completely different from, uh, the other ones. The mech support's completely different from that.
Okay.
But just if you want to just pick out any of the
Sure.
Scarlet Scar is a tell us about that storyline if you don't mind.
Well, Scarlet Scar was interesting because it started because happened during the time when I was trying to find an artist for Captain China.
Mhm.
To be honest, it took a while for the project to come together to say, okay, going from parody to a real superhero concept, and then finally deciding what type of story I want to tell, and deciding on doing that. And then I was looking for an artist, and originally, I wasn't sure what would work. I just said I wanted at least somewhat superhero style, but it could even be a manga style. It doesn't matter. So, I originally started talking to some Chinese artists, and I spent 2 years talking to them. And people were either not interested at the time or some other various reasons. So I couldn't find an artist. Just got to a point when I said, okay, I can't find anyone. Maybe just put out an ad, a wanted ad to get people. And there was, I don't know if the website still exists called digitalwebbing.com.
I'm not sure.
It was a site where if you need to find work, you go there. You for a colorist or writer or whatever. So I say, I'm looking for an artist to do a superhero book. Can somebody send me submissions? I got 100 submissions one day.
Wow.
And out of all that, I went down to 10 people. And out of all that, I went down to 4 people. And out of the 4 candidates, one of them got chosen for Captain China. But there were a few other guys that were pretty good. And one of them, was the guy that ended up doing Scarlet Scar. He has sort of painted style, but I knew he couldn't do long-term work because it's much more involved. But I like his stuff. So I want to at least work with you on that. I wanted to hire you for a project because he was German. He was in Europe. So I said, okay, then, and he has a painted style. Say, okay, let me write a story that will fit to that. So I said, okay, let me do a vampire, because vampire genre during that time period was pretty big. There was a lot of big vampire movies in the theater during that time. Really kicked off by Twilight. To be honest, Twilight generated a bunch of vampire movies of all kind, vampire zombie movies around that time period. So I said, okay, let me write that because here's the interesting thing. Vampire genre has a huge attraction for female audience. So I say, okay, if I'm doing that, let me at least put a love story in there. And I think that would kind of work. But I looked at a lot of the vampire movies at that time period. They all modernized them. They bring them to modern days. It's just modern time, whatever. But I say, you know what? We don't really have one that's set kind of in that, medieval setting. And that medieval setting. And but I say, but I also don't want, because during the whole Twilight era, it's like, even with Interview with Vampire, they started making vampires just good, wholesome, kind of had their own troubles and beliefs. I said, let's turn them back into monsters again. But let's have a hero that goes around hunting them down. And I thought the way his motivation, the way he does it, is because there's a tragic love behind story. So that kind of fits the love story, angle of it. So that's kind of why I conceived that. Now, what was interesting was the artist did the book, turned it back, and it wasn't 100%. His action sequence wasn't 100% up to what I wanted. I realized he wasn't great with action. He can draw beautiful images, but when it comes to action, he's not know how to handle that. So I didn't know what to do with the book. Originally, I had some of the working titles like Blood and Sword, and I go, "Whoa, this thing don't look like Blood and Sword" at the end. And I didn't know what to do with that, so I kind of just let it sit for a while. And it wasn't until I got my business partner came in. He was looking at all the catalog books I had. He goes, "Oh, you got this thing finished?" I said, "Yeah." But I said, "I don't know what to call it. I don't know what to sell it." Because it's kind of, it's like, it's an action book with very weak action. What's the problem with that? So he and I sat around and started talking about it. What can we do? And then somehow he came up with the name Scarlet Scar. And I go, that sounds great. Because now it sells more of a tragedy angle. So we're not selling it as an action book anymore. Well, originally I was envisioning more of an action book because of my Marvel Comics background.
Mm-hmm.
But because it couldn't work that, we repackaged it as that, and we put that title on there. Now, here's the funniest thing. It was just a one-shot, so the story literally concludes in 24 pages. I had no real plan to do any more of it. It's a guy seeking these 3 vampires that killed his loved one, and he finally found them, and he has to duel with them, all that kind of stuff, and there's a conflict, all that kind of stuff. And it was just one-shot, done deal. But then when we, create the site and put it up there, he goes, man, that's the one that, and it's true, it's getting the most response, people, where people really go, what happens next? Out of all our books, he's the only one that stirred interest, imagination in people. So it got to a point.
It's weird how that happens.
Yeah. So we're like, okay, at this point, we have to do a sequel. And I'm just kind of planning to figure out, okay, what angle can we tackle this with? And I think that's interesting because that's a huge surprise. I originally, had a different intent for the book, more action driven. I got back, it wasn't what I wanted. And I didn't know what to do with it. Repackaged it, and it actually found its own audience.
That's awesome.
So I go, okay, now we have to do a sequel and kind of continue on that kind of the theme and idea. But even though it was a done and done book, what's interesting, I even showed to, because I'm out here in California trying to meet with some of the Hollywood people. That's the one that people reacted to the most too. They're like, oh, this can be turned into a movie of some sort. So it's interesting. It's like, okay, now the least, I thought I had has become the most potential all of a sudden. But it's a vampire book that was trying to do something a little different, but now it could become something.
Sounds very.
That's kind of the short end of it without giving away anything net. But you mentioned mech support before, so let me talk a little bit about
what
that.
Was this? It looks very comical. I read only a few pages, and I didn't get too far into it, but it looks just kind of
okay,
like it's a future that's like too complicated. It's like
okay, yeah. Well, mech support can be summed up with one sort of Hollywood elevator pitch.
Yeah,
because a friend of mine conceived that. He wrote it, and I just did the artwork for it. The simple description is Ghostbusters with robots. That's what it is, So
they're fighting ghosts or robots?
Robots.
So
think they're Ghostbuster, but they're dealing with robots instead of ghosts.
Yeah.
So what it is it's basically in the future, when there's so many robots around.
Yeah.
And then they need to have a group of people dealing with ones that goes out of control. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
That's why it's called mech support, sort of play off the word tech support.
Yeah. Get rid of these robots. They've malfunctioned. This is crazy.
Right. So of course, because he wrote it from the angle, it's kind of got comedic elements in there as well.
Yeah.
And this was conceived. This is funny because this is a friend of mine I knew. In New York, I knew him for a long time. He's a great guy. He's a pretty good writer too, but he likes to write horror genre.
Okay.
That's really his forte. He loves. Good guy. When I first met him, we're both just kind of, just got out of high school at the time and working in the comic industry. And he's like, hey, come to my house this weekend and hang out. So I go hang out. And when I get there by noon, he would say, hey, let me show you a horror movie. So he would show me a horror movie. And then he would show me another one. So we go from noon to 12 midnight watching a horror movie the whole day. And he just loves horror movie. He just wants to write horror movie. So, but he didn't have any real art skills, and he didn't have anyone who could draw. He couldn't find an artist that could draw his book for him. So at one point he says, you know what? I said, I think you're a talented guy. I know you're good. Why don't I just draw a book for you? Write me a book, I'll draw for you. And I thought, hey, I get to kind of try out working on a horror comic book. That would be really great. But then when he came back with the story proposal, he go, gee, I know you like to draw robots. So I decided to do a robot comedy. I'm like, good God, I want to do a horror, not a comedy. But I promise I'll do whatever you want me to do. And he gave me that. That's kind of how that book came about.
It is really silly. I like it. It looks really cool. And then
we will return to the interview with Chi in just a moment.
Have you read Red Mage Ascending, the Mage of Blood Magic, in the Tournament of Mages Book 1 by Cleave Bourbon? The servant girl has a secret, and she's hiding it in plain sight. Hannah works for a well-to-do family who treats her well, but something is not quite right. The servant girl doesn't act like a servant. She speaks with multiple languages, including High Elvish. She is a skilled musician and a talented artist. There is also another talent, but its secret Hannah guards closely. She can use blood magic. She is hiding because she knows if she is found out, she will have to fight in the Tournament of Mages, a contest where she will be pitted against 5 other mages with different forms of magic. She has left everything behind, her family, her friends, and the one secret she dares not reveal. Now available on Kindle, audiobooks on Audible, in hardcover and paperback. Find it online on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble's, iBooks, Kobo, and wherever you buy good books. This book is by Cleave Bourbon. Buy it now.
And now back to the interview with comic book creator Chi Wang.
Have some more anime-driven stories like Oniyama Shrine.
Yeah, okay. Oniyama Shrine is actually a spin-off book from Oni Riser.
Okay, well, let's talk about Oni Riser.
Okay. Oni Riser, we'll talk about that first, and I'll describe a little bit of Oniyama Shrine next. Oni Riser was something that was done almost toward the end of Captain China's production. Because it really started because I was running an anime shop at the time, you know. And I saw that the 2 best-selling products in the anime shop is anime girl figures and Gundam model kits. So I was originally saying, okay, you know, I'm a comic book artist. I can probably do a comic book that's serialized on a website or social media. We can throw out a comic book page every week or so and be able to read it and then know about comic books. It's really a marketing idea. So I said, if they like anime girls and robots, then combine the 2 genres and do that. And it was just supposed to be a short story. But then shortly after the idea was conceived and I planned it out, I was going to start the comic book, the shop ran into financial trouble and I would close it down. So never got a chance to do it for the shop itself. But then afterwards, when Captain China was done, and I met my business partner, I said, okay. I said, Captain China done, but we want to develop some new books. So we looked through all the catalog of proposals and ideas and different things I have. And I told him, I said, Oni Rise will be the easiest one to execute because it's a one-shot story. I can execute it myself, so I wouldn't have to really pay any extra money out of the pocket or look for an artist, and let's just do that. He goes, okay. So we decided to work on that. And Oni Riser is interesting because it came really as a marketing idea to promote a book. And I used the elements of what's popular. That's with Japanese anime right now. Giant robots, cute girls. And then I really was looking at what was really going on in their trend of their movies. If you ever watched Japanese anime for the past probably 10 years, their movies have a similar trend. Whether it's movies like Your Name or Summer Wars or that kind of stuff, it's really a sort of a boy meets girl story. And then it always takes place in the countryside, and everyone has a big adventure. You can sum up almost all the Japanese anime movie in the past 10 years under this one simple element. So I said, let's build a story around that.
Now I get it. I was reading the first couple pages. Now I totally get it because when you said that, it makes sense.
But I also know why, because their culture is in trouble right now. Because we talk about low birth rate, people not getting married. So it's reflected in all these movies. People want to meet somebody. And people want to get away from the big city life. That's why it's all taking place in countryside. And when it's in countryside, some big, crazy, almost fantasy, beyond control element happens. And the guy and the boy have an adventure and finds himself in the process. But that's a defining sort of almost a relief for the Japanese people, because that's what they need in their society right now. So that's why all their movies are like that, because that's why it sells. Oh, okay. So, it speaks about what I want. So I said, let me do that. And so the story was restructured around that. Takes place in the countryside, a little town, where guys talk about the main character said, I want to adventure. And then also talks about decline their culture.
Yeah, I saw that. The first couple scenes, you get right to the point. The guy's a cop, but he's not having no adventures. He's and then, anyways, totally get it.
So there's that. But I also know Japanese are also worried about the decline in their culture. That's why the male cops represents the desire for adventure outside of a boring life, which is what the current society wants. And the little shrine girl represents the loss of culture. We're losing our population. It's on decline. What do we do? We're losing our tradition. So those are two concerns that pop up. And it ties and happen in a little village. But then as it progresses, it becomes a bigger and bigger adventure. So I basically take that basic storytelling structure and package it with an anime girl and a giant robot in there too. So that's really how that came.
Sounds really thought out. I really even more interesting now that you explained that.
Yeah, read it. It's pretty fun. Yeah. It's a short story, and what's interesting about that was. I also went the opposite of the way I handled this versus Captain China, because Captain China was there was a clear worldview that was developed, what it takes place, who these characters are, what they represent, what they're about. And when I was walking on Riser, I said, you know what, I'm tired of planning out something so detailed and big. Let me not plan anything. I just have the character designs. And the visual designs and go, So I didn't design this background for it. I just said, let's just go with it.
Yeah.
So it'd go the opposite of planning everything out. But there were running into problems in terms of production.
All right, we're getting to the 2-hour mark. Chi, you're just so interesting to talk to.
Well, it's great to talk to you guys.
It's great listening to you. Cleave, do you got anything you want to interject right now as we're coming down?
Sure. Well, first of all, I was talking. Go ahead, John.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
I was just saying, I really enjoy. I want to thank you both first for inviting me up. Because this is kind of a surprise out of nowhere. So I at least want to say that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that my first word was Batman.
Okay.
It wasn't mommy or daddy. It was Batman. So that'll tell you where my thoughts always lie.
Okay. Well, we talked about Batman before too.
Superheroes.
When we talked about your time with Marvel, it really shows that that you have brought the storytelling to these comics. So when it comes down to characters and stories and arcs, and it really makes these comics that you have online even more appealing and interesting when you start to, hopefully we get that out to some of our listeners to come check out. Sure. Either if they go to brushpicks.com or if they go to Excel Comics, you really got to check out. The art is visually stunning, and it really makes these stories really appealing. You want to get in there, and I can tell that the way you spoke about the inker or the storyteller from G.I. Joe, how he finished that last series, that story matters to you, and finishing the story, and that really makes a difference. I think really caring about that.
Well, before we let you go, too, what's next? What's coming up? Do you have anything? Do you have any spoilery thing or something that you're working on now?
Well, first of all, just at least mention that Oniyama Shrine. That's actually one of the projects I'm working on right now. It's a spin-off Oni Riser. Basically, I decide, because I set up these two characters, the cop and the little girl. So I want to use. I figure, you know what? I want to continue with those characters, but I didn't want to do a big, crazy sci-fi adventure anymore. But I use them to at least. I say, okay, I know a lot of these kids today. They love Japanese culture, but I don't really know what they're about. So that book became more. I decided to have a more educational focus, which each chapter talks about traditions and customs and their holidays and stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting. You go from a big, crazy sci-fi, almost alien invasion adventure to now these same characters on the story, almost a slice of life, talking about their everyday dealings in the Japanese shrine. So that's kind of what that book was about. The other one is, which we talked about much earlier, the Luther Chronicles is back in production. Because I met up with the artist 2 years ago when I was driving from East Coast to the West Coast to move out here. And I met up with him in Indiana. That's where he lives right now. And we had lunch. He goes, "Hey, I got time to work on it right now." So suddenly that's back in production. So those are the two books I'm very excited on working on. And finally,
and Luther's the Christian one, right?
You're right. The Luther book has been in a hiatus for 14 years.
Wow.
and it's finally on production. And it's a 6-book series. Number 5 is done. I'm working on 6, so it's finally gonna be finished
Neat.
after all
cool.
this time. Yeah.
I
14 years.
You know,
Wow.
they had the
Yeah.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer movie. There's another. You could really go. You could keep going in that genre. You know, the Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Was a German. The German. He was a Lutheran. A Lutheran minister who stood up
Okay.
against the Nazis in Germany. Is a very compelling story. That's more serious and dark, but that's an actual person.
Well, that is something we can even look down the line once Luther is done. There's so many historical Christian figures I think we can work on that has maybe have real value for people that could kind of use as a example how they can try to follow to become a Christian or learns to be a better person. Very simple as that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's at the same time.
Well, this has been a complete pleasure, and we're gonna make this a 2-parter because it was so cool, and I'll probably
We got to show it all.
but we'll do
Mm-hmm.
we'll do a long
Super
version, and
interesting.
we'll do a 1 and 2-parters, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's great, and
Super interesting. Yeah.
you got to keep us informed of your new projects and stuff like that. So please come back whenever you got something you want to promote. Talk about.
Whenever you want me back, let me know. I'll find time for you always.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Okay, great. That sounds awesome.
Well, we're gonna wrap it up and go to excelcomics.com or brushpix.com. It's BRUSHPIX.com, and we'll put some links in the description so you can go straight there.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for being on our podcast.
Thanks for
appreciate it.
inviting me off.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll see you next time.